Beyond recorded history, the cold, infinite reaches of space have been viewed as desolate, barren, lifeless. But are they really? This is the observatory at Mount Palomar, almost 6,000 feet above sea level. Its mirror, almost 16 feet across, can collect light from stars more than 4 billion light-years away. These nebulae are more than 2 billion light-years from Earth, and they are but a few of billions just the same. In fact, within our galaxy alone, there are as many as 50 million stars that many scientists feel could possibly support livable planets. With so many opportunities for life on other worlds, is it rational to assume that our own humble planet is the only sphere in the cosmos to host intelligent beings? Or is it possible that, at some distant point in this planet's history, we've been visited by one of our celestial neighbors? Many in the scientific community seem to think so. The late Wernher von Braun, famed rocketry expert, once stated, "I hold as a definite probability the existence of not only animal and vegetable life in the infinite reaches of the universe, but also that of intelligent life." Professor Hermann Oberth, the father of interplanetary travel, stated, "I believe that it's possible for unknown foreign beings of a superior intelligence to have visited our planet at a remote point in time." The Russian scientist Kosuntsev, member of the Moscow Academy of Sciences, has asserted, "To the question of whether extraterrestrial beings gifted with intelligence have ever visited the Earth, I would reply in the affirmative." And Dr. Vyacheslav Setsev, with the Academy of Science at Minsk, has declared, "Personally, I'm absolutely convinced that extraterrestrial creatures have stopped on our planet because of the many traces they left behind." But what are these traces? How do we recognize them? Perhaps the key to interpretation is found in lessons from recent history. During World War II, soldiers were assigned to many desolate lookout positions that dotted the Pacific, as well as other remote and isolated areas. The natives on many of these islands were primitive and superstitious. The strange visitors had brought with them seemingly magical items, tools, fantastic weapons, flying machines, medicines, things beyond the imagination of primal man. After the war, the departing soldiers never gave it a second thought and were just happy to be going home. However, the arrival and sudden departure of military personnel to these islands brought with it an unexpected result. Years later, subsequent visitors found the natives had made straw and bamboo likenesses of airplanes, as well as crude landing surfaces on their islands, all in an apparent attempt to lure back the strangers with magical powers. Most everything was tried, it would seem, from chants and shrines to fiery sacrifices. Day and night they scanned the heavens, waiting and watching for the return of their gods, the gods of the U.S. military. But more importantly, the islanders had a new religion. The chance, brief encounter between a primitive people and visitors from a technologically advanced race had left its mark on an entire society, a mark that remains in effect to this day as legends are handed down from generation to generation about the visitors from the heavens. The Russian scholars Kosuntsev and Setsev theorize that many religions may have started in this very same manner. For example, the Tibetan books of Kanshur are written in a code that has baffled cryptographers for centuries. As a result, only 1/100th of the Kanshur has been deciphered. Nonetheless, this 1% alone is full of references to gods flying in from the heavens. Specifically, descriptions of the luminous pearls and transparent spheres in which these gods lived seem as important in the Kanshur text as the gods themselves. In India, ancient writings known as the Mahabharata have provided the Indian people with a source of guidance and wisdom for over 6,000 years. The 80,000 verses that make up its text reveal much about the past. Like the Kanshur of Tibet, the Mahabharata also speaks of gods come to earth. The poems consistently refer to flying vehicles known as vimanas, used by the gods to soar to great heights. Here we see a reconstruction of a vimana made by Dr. Kasuntsev according to precise descriptions found within the Mahabharata. These vehicles were supposedly propelled by Mercury, accompanied by powerful wind currents. Indeed, one passage of the poem reads, "The Vimana rose on a gigantic beam of light which shone as the sun, and whose noise was like that of thunder." The writings of the Kanshur of Tibet or the Mahabharata of India might be easily dismissed by Westerners as exotic fables or elaborate folk tales. But what of our own religious history? This is the Dead Sea. Among the treacherous rock formations of nearby Qumran, two young shepherd boys made a startling discovery. In 1947, they uncovered the famous Dead Sea Scrolls, which shook the religious world to its very foundations. Inscribed on leather roughly 2,000 years ago, the Qumran text relay tales about the sons of heaven and, most importantly, about the incredible sky machines that brought them to earth. As in the Kanshur and the Mahabharata, these gods from above arrived amidst clouds of smoke and thunderous fire. Such revelations present us with a unique problem. What do we hold as truth, and what do we dismiss as fantasy? Consider the work of Heinrich Schliemann. For thousands of years, the tales of Homer in the epic poem The Iliad and the Odyssey were considered nothing but legend. The fabled city of Troy, featured so prominently in the poem, was considered the stuff of imagination. But in 1864, over 100 years ago, Schliemann decided to take the tales of Homer literally. It led him to the shores of Asia Minor, where, to the surprise of his contemporaries, he found Troy exactly where Homer said it was. Though ridiculed in his own day, Schliemann is now considered one of history's greatest archaeologists. Is there an element of truth in every legend? The 19th chapter of the first book of Moses reads, "The Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire." Previously, God had sent messengers to warn Lot's family. "Flee for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Flee to the hills, lest you be consumed." Curiously, mountains do offer protection from radioactivity. In addition, Sodom and Gomorrah were leveled in one blinding flash. Was the fire and brimstone of God really an atomic explosion? As improbable as this might seem, consider the biblical account. "Then he looked down and beheld, and lo, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace." In 1961, a group of Minnesota college students began a curious project. Following the 25th chapter of the second book of Moses, they fashioned a replica of the Ark of the Covenant using details provided in Scripture, part of which reads, "And they shall make an ark of acacia wood. 2 cubits and a half shall be its length, 1 cubit and a half its breadth, and 1 cubit and a half its height. And you shall overlay it with pure gold within and without, and you shall make upon it a molding of gold round about." According to the Bible, Moses provided his workmen with special shoes and clothing to insulate them from the tremendous power of the ark, which bristled with sparks and flashes of light. To their surprise, the college students had built, in effect, a high-voltage condenser, one side of the plates carrying a negative charge, the other a positive charge. So powerful was it that their teacher had it dismantled out of fear for their safety. Of course, this account is one of many in the Bible that confronts our modern-day perceptions of history. But it is the story of Ezekiel the prophet that brings us descriptions that are the most hauntingly familiar to a space-age society. In the Book of Book, Ezekiel describes the arrival of visitors from the sky. "In the 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, the heavens opened. As I looked, behold, a stormy wind came out of the north, and a great cloud with brightness round about it, and fire flashing forth continually, and in the midst of the fire, as it were, gleaming bronze. Was this the landing of a spaceship, perhaps? Upon the visitors' departure, the prophet wrote, "And when they went, I heard the sound of their wings like the thunder of the Almighty, a sound of tumult like the sound of the host." Of course, literary descriptions might be open to interpretation, but what of the early illustrations found throughout the religious world? How do they compare with these tales from the past? In southern Yugoslavia, we find the monastery Disoni. Toward the middle 14th century, frescoes were commissioned to decorate the walls and ceilings of this ancient structure. The subject matter is surprising. It depicts spectators cowering in fear of a spectacle in the skies above. Clearly, we see two spacecraft. In the first, we see a pilot with his hand on a control lever. He looks to a second craft, obviously in pursuit. The aerodynamic forms of these vehicles is as unmistakable as the jets trailing behind them. And finally, the Bible speaks of the angels of promise. An early painting depicts them as creatures with metal legs and landing pads. Could the similarity between them and modern lunar landers be mere coincidence? Or is there a connection with the cosmos hidden within the texts of legends found throughout the world? As we have seen, the historical record of both myth and religion offer tales of godlike beings come from the heavens. But what direct evidence was left behind by these visitors? This is Istanbul, home of the great palace of Topkapi. During the 18th century, a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis stumbled upon a set of very unusual maps while visiting the Orient. Today, these maps are kept under tight security within the palace walls. Although the oldest of the maps dates back to the 1st century AD, they are more than likely copies of even earlier maps, handed down from one generation of navigators to another. Upon inspection of one map, we can clearly see the outlines of Europe, Africa, as well as Central and South America. Curiously, the view is a spot-on representation of what one would expect to see if high above Cairo. Stranger still is this view of Antarctica, which wasn't established as a continent until the 19th century. Yet here it appears on a map dating back to 1532. As the Antarctic had yet to be explored by man, one can only assume these drawings were made by someone viewing the Earth from a great distance long, long ago. Here we see Cairo, home for more than 3 million people on the River Nile. Nearby is Gizeh, home of the legendary Sphinx, the Great Pyramids, and one of the most puzzling mathematical mysteries of history. The Pyramid of Cheops has a base of about 570,000 square feet. The structure originally stood 477 feet high, with passages leading to the interior. Each block comprising the pyramid weighs a staggering 2.5 tons, for a total weight of 6.5 million tons for the entire pyramid. As each of the 2,300,000 stones had to be transported from a quarry on the far banks of the Nile, the mathematical puzzle takes shape. Aside from a general lack of wood for rollers, there is the question of sheer manpower needed to build such a monument. With even 20,000 workmen hauling and installing an improbable 10 blocks a day, it would still take 644 years just to build a single pyramid. The structure itself contains some unusual characteristics. If you multiply the height of the Pyramid of Cheops by 1 billion, you get the distance from the Earth to the Sun. In addition, the longitude which runs through the center of the pyramid divides continents and oceans into 2 precise halves. And finally, if you were to divide the perimeter of the base by twice the height, you arrive at exactly the figure pi. Pi, as we know, is used to determine the circumference of a circle. Only it wasn't discovered by the Dutch mathematician Ludolf until the 16th century. Is it only coincidence that a structure of such antiquity should possess so many mathematical, geographical, and astronomical values? Or is there a greater cosmic connection forgotten through the ages? This is the Pyramid of Khefu. Nearby, the legendary Sphinx maintains an eternal watch over Gizeh. Who built these colossal monuments so long ago that their exact age is unknown? The statue of Ramses II is thought to be about 3,000 years old, but that's just a guess. Weighing 1,200 tons, it was carved from a single block transported from the quarries of Macadam, more than 370 miles away. This is the Memnon Colossi. Roughly the same age, they stand 52 feet high, also carved from solid rock. Each weighs more than 1,000 tons. Like the statue of Ramses, they also came from the Macadam quarries. Here we see the obelisk of Luxor. Also about 3,000 years old, it too is sculpted out of one solid piece of red granite, as is the obelisk of Karnak, more than 96 feet tall. Weighing 400 tons, it was transported in one piece from Aswan, over 185 miles away. The proof of such a journey can be found in Aswan itself, for this is the great unfinished obelisk of Aswan. Over 135 feet long, it is 1,200 tons of solid red granite. What destination awaited its completion? How would it have been moved? Such an ancient problem became a modern-day reality when the temple of Abu Simbel and its monuments on the banks of the River Nile had to be relocated to make way for the Aswan Dam. Ironically, more than 3,000 years after construction of this temple by a simple, primitive people with little or no tools, it took the combined resources of more than 100 nations 3 years to solve the complicated engineering problems of its relocation. 300,000 precise measurements preceded the removing of the thousands of stone blocks, each weighing several tons. Even with the use of modern equipment, the lifting and transportation of these blocks proved almost insurmountable. How did the ancients do it? What forms of levitation were used to so quickly transport thousands of immense blocks over such long distances? To this day, the answer to this riddle remains elusive, lost somewhere in the sands of time. In the Nile Valley, near Luxor, we find the Valley of the Kings. Like the Great Pyramids, the valley was a royal burial place during the time of the pharaohs. The tomb of King Sethos II, sculptured out of solid rock 300 feet within, contains fascinating murals and wall carvings. More fascinating still is that they were achieved without any known light source. As the ceiling contains no traces of soot, it is believed that no torches or oil lamps were used. Some have suggested that workers might have utilized a vast series of mirrors to bring sunlight into the crypts. However, mirrors of that time were poorly crafted, reflecting only about 40% of the light in a widely scattered pattern. With each successive mirror in the series losing another 60%, very little, if any, light would be available for the artist to work by. Nonetheless, the walls are full of unusual figures, each with a symbolic reference to their relationship with the universe, each created under the mysterious glow of some as yet unknown light source. Far to the southwest, the oasis of Janet beckons. 1,200 miles south of Algiers, it lies in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Nearby is the plateau of Tassili. 15,000 years ago, the Sahara was fertile and lush with plant life. In fact, it was the most densely populated area of the world at that time. As a result, thousands of wall paintings have been found in Tassili. Some were created 8 to 10,000 years before Christ, during a time known as the Neolithic period. As the artists were hunters and farmers, the theme of the paintings are usually the same: animals and people. But there is an exception within the thousands of images found in Tassili. This being seems to be wearing a form of helmet. Note the total lack of eyes. No nose, no mouth, only round faceplates to see through. The body seems to float effortlessly. As the artists of that period were skilled craftsmen, their representations of men and animals are astonishingly accurate. Therefore, it is reasonable to assume that this drawing is an accurate representation of what the artists saw almost 15,000 years ago. Here we see what appears to be a space station or module. Note the interconnecting beams. Nearby are more helmeted creatures. They too float effortlessly in space. Long ago, the French archaeologist Henri Léaut found perhaps the largest of these wall paintings. Again, the creature appears to be wearing some sort of helmet. Henri Léaut called the 19-foot drawing the Great God Mars, decades before the term astronaut had even been coined. As we move down into the bushlands of southern Rhodesia, we find the temple ruins of Zimbabwe. No one knows who built it. Unusual construction for the area, the temple is comprised of brick-shaped granite blocks. Of course, brick-making is nothing new to a primitive people. Using simple molds, Indians of the southwest United States have produced clay and mud bricks for generations. However, each brick comprising the temple of Zimbabwe is pure granite and had to be individually sculpted out of solid rock. Yet each block is identical to the other as if they were produced in a precision factory. In fact, over 20,000 tons of these bricks were used to build the Temple of Zimbabwe. The walls reach a height of over 30 feet and have withstood thousands of years of exposure to the elements. As the local bushmen live in straw huts, it seems unlikely that their ancestors built this ghost town of stone. In Mexico, we find yet another amazing structure, the Pyramid of Cholula. Though hidden beneath this hill, its base measures 1,000 feet by 1,170 feet. Over 178 feet high, the Pyramid of Cholula has a volume of over 3 million cubic yards, larger than the Pyramid of Cheops by 500,000 cubic yards. But like the Pyramid of Cheops, the question of who built it is as puzzling as how it was built. Considering the lack of technology present so long ago, it's been estimated that the Pyramid of Cholula would have taken 600 years to build, virtually the same time estimate given for the Egyptian pyramids in Gizeh. Though separated on different continents, could the common shape of the pyramid hold a form of cosmic connection between several civilizations? Beyond the structural similarities, both the Egyptian and Aztec cultures refer to the great sun god. Both used highly advanced astronomical calculations to judge the passage of time. We already know of the mathematical values present in the Pyramid of Cheops. In the Museum Nacional of Mexico City is an example of an Aztec calendar stone. More than 11 feet across, it weighs over 24 tons and originally stood before the temple of the sun god. Without the aid of telescopes or mathematical instruments, the Aztecs created a calendar of amazing accuracy at 365 1/4 days. Could such precise measurements be made using only observations of the sun and moon? Or was there help from another source? Perhaps a clue rests in another part of the museum. This ancient sculpture seems vaguely familiar, does it not? As we have seen, the pyramid form seems common to both Aztec as well as Egyptian cultures of the distant past. Here in Teotihuacan, about an hour's drive outside of Mexico City, is the Pyramid of the Sun. Over 216 feet in height, the Pyramid of the Sun has a base measuring 760 feet by 720 feet. Like the pyramids of Gizeh, no one knows how it was built or how long it took. But a clue might be found in the name itself. At an altitude of 6,500 feet, the name Teotihuacan appropriately means where the gods reside. But who were these gods? What was their purpose in coming here? A mile south of these pyramids is the temple of Quetzalcoatl, the great feathered serpent. However, Quetzalcoatl was not a great beast, but rather a light-skinned, bearded man who came from the stars. He taught the Aztec people about law, the arts, and how to cultivate cotton and corn. As the story goes, Quetzalcoatl finished his mission here and returned to the morning star. Merely superstitious legend? Perhaps. But remember the U.S. soldiers upon finishing their mission in the Pacific? They too were thought of as gods from the sky. About 20 miles away are the ruins of Tula. Here we find monumental sculptures standing watch over time. They hold tools or controls of some nature. Could they be communication equipment? Possibly. Legend has it that the towns of Tula, Coba, Chichen Itza, and Uxmal were linked by an unseen magical ladder hung in the sky. Even two-way radios would seem like instruments of the gods to a primitive people. In La Venta, more stone statues, each weighing 200 tons. Only jungle and swamp surround these ancient helmeted sentinels. The closest possible quarry is over 80 miles away. Like the stone blocks and monuments in Egypt, the question of how these leviathans were transported remains a mystery. Across the mountains, we find Chichen Itza. Within its ruins is a Mayan observatory. It was used to study and collect astrological data. As you can see, its design is nearly identical to that of a modern observatory. But what use would an observatory be to a primitive people with no telescopes? Or was it originally used by someone else and simply inherited by the Mayan people centuries later? Again, we find a pyramid containing astronomical values as part of its design. Each of the 365 steps on this monolith represents one day of the year. The pyramid is, in effect, a huge calendar made of stone. As with the Aztec calendar stone, the question remains, how accurate could the yearly calculations be without advanced technology? Who would supply such a thing? A clue might be found in this sculpture. Is this the image of a pilot? He appears to be situated in a small room. His hand seems to be operating a control lever. So common to these images now, he, too, wears a helmet, with projections resembling antennae. Is this an ancient helper of the Mayan people? Perhaps. Of course, not all the gods were so kind. In fact, about 600 years after Christ, the entire Mayan civilization left this area in great haste. Abandoning towns, temples, and pyramids, they moved northward and re-established themselves in another area. However, there is no record of war, famine, plague, or catastrophe to account for the sudden relocation. What would cause an entire society to abandon all that generations of hard work and great labor had produced? Could it have been fear? The evidence might suggest such. This is the winged god Kukulkan. He appears here in his sky vehicle. Note his hands on the controls and the tight-fitting uniform or coveralls. His chair is padded to absorb the effect of acceleration as his foot presses a form of pedal. At the rear of his capsule, we see the obvious trails of a jet exhaust. After serving the Mayan people for generations, Kukulkan suddenly departed. The bloody warrior god Shokmul had interceded and taken control of the Mayan culture. By all accounts a horrible creature, Shokmul carried a tray to receive offerings of human hearts. In times of drought, the people were led to the sacred well called Cenote, where young maidens were sacrificed. The deep waters and vertical walls offered no escape for the helpless, drowning victims. Was the evil god Shokmul an unfriendly visitor from the sky? Or would the Mayan people abandon their homes over fear of a simple myth? Legend has it that Kukulkan, the great god of Palenque, came from the stars and returned to them. But what is the evidence? Note the similarities between Kukulkan and a modern astronaut. Even the sinister sacred well of Cenote presents a clue to the area's violent past. Though not considered a creation of nature, it is too deep and perfect to have been made by hand. Some suggest it is a crater. Perhaps the mark made by Kukulkan's ship as he made a hasty retreat to the heavens. So far, our research has uncovered a variety of pyramids on several continents. Their size and complexity are a testament to the effect these gods from the sky had on an ancient society. But there is one place where the gods themselves were sculpted in stone on just as grand a scale. This is the legendary Easter Island. It is virtually a speck in the South Pacific. In fact, the city of Paris is 7 times larger than this tiny island, so full of mystery. Legend has it that thousands of years ago, flying people came here accompanied by much fire and smoke. The local natives still refer to the island as Mata Kitterone, or eyes looking up to heaven, and for good reason. This is one of more than 600 gigantic stone figures that stand a silent vigil on the island. Weighing more than 400 tons, most are over 65 feet tall if fully unearthed. They were sculpted here in the volcanic crater known as Ronureraku. Tiny though the island may be, most of these giants had to be moved more than 12 miles. As in Egypt and Mexico, the lack of technology available so long ago only deepens the mystery. In fact, the stone is so hard that repeated blows with a hammer and chisels hardly scratch the surface. As there is no hardwood for rollers and no sign that these giants were dragged across the island, the story of how they were moved is just as vexing as how they were created. To put things in perspective, consider this. The average population is around 3,000. All experts agree that at the most there were never more than 4,000 people living on Easter Island at one time. On the average, 70% of the population consists of women, children, or the elderly. This leaves only 30%, or around 900 men, to hunt or raise food for the rest of society. Even now, with limited resources, day-to-day survival on Easter Island is still a struggle. Modern conveniences like electricity and running water are a rarity. Imagine what it was like 3,000 years ago, living on such a barren and lifeless rock in the middle of the Pacific. Would such a small workforce really have time to sculpt and move over 600 gigantic figures found everywhere on the island? It would seem improbable. On the other hand, folklore claims that 2 mysterious priests could move the stone giants using a force called mana. Were these the visitors that came to the island amidst smoke and fire? What was mana? Did it revolve around certain electromagnetic powers? It's true that Easter Island exhibits an unusually strong magnetism even today. As the legend goes, one day the priests left the island, never to return. They apparently took the mana with them, as the quarry at Ronureraku contains several unfinished figures. Three 3,000 miles to the east, we find Cuzco, the capital of the Inca Empire. Founded by the messengers of the great sun god, it is 11,380 feet above sea level in the Peruvian Andes. Again, similarities in stone craftsmanship abound. Note this unusual 12-sided block, each of its facets almost machine-perfect. The blocks for this stone wall on Easter Island are executed with the same precision as the walls bordering the narrow streets of Cuzco. Even after thousands of years of exposure to the elements, the expert trimming and setting of these massive blocks are so perfect even a knife blade will not penetrate the seams. High above Cuzco, we find more examples of precision stonework. This is Machu Picchu, a citadel built long before the Incas came to inhabit the area. These are the ruins of Sacsayhuaman. Again, stones weighing 500 tons defy gravity to form a wall over 1,200 feet long. Like Machu Picchu, the fortress of Sacsayhuaman was also built before the time of the Incas. When Pizarro, the Spanish conquistador, asked the Incas who built it, he was given a surprising answer. As the legend goes, the builders of Machu Picchu and Sacsayhuaman were auburn-haired, light-skinned, bearded men from the sky. The great god of the morning star, Quetzalcoatl, has been described by the Aztec people in exactly the same terms. Could these visitors from the heavens come from the same advanced race? The similarities found within the Inca, Mayan, and Aztec cultures certainly suggest a connection that transcends all earthly limitations. This is La Paz. the capital of Bolivia. Located at the base of the King's Cordillera, it is 12,350 feet above sea level, making it the highest capital in the world. Higher still is Lake Titicaca, the highest lake in the world. 18 miles away is Tiahuanaco, the temple built in honor of Ohana, or Mother Earth, who came from the stars in a golden chariot. Like Quetzalcoatl, she also endowed her people with great wisdom before she returned to the heavens. It is thought that the shores of Lake Titicaca once washed at the base of this ancient temple. Scientists have documented that the waters recede roughly a foot every 100 years. Considering that present-day Lake Titicaca is now 18 miles away from the temple, one can only guess at the age of this ancient structure. As we have seen, the traces of ancient visitors to our planet have been found on all continents, even Australia. In the rough outback of the land down under, there are hundreds of rock paintings that predate history. This drawing is called Wandjina, or Goddess of the Milky Way. As we find common to other legends, she also came from the stars to give guidance and wisdom to her people. It seems curious that this deity would be so similar to that found in America, or Africa, or Europe, or Asia. This is called a dogu of Japan. Found on the island of Hansu, these figurines are more than 5,000 years old. Kazantsev of Russia offers this view of the dogus. In my opinion, these figures represent astro beings seen on Earth. Their sealed helmets are equipped with breathing apparatus. The clothing they wear seems inflated, as though to compensate for the higher atmospheric pressure here on Earth. Notice the treatment of the hands, more like mechanical claws than human fingers. Kazantsev pointed out one other unusual aspect, the similarity of the dogu figurines to the great god Mars, found on a cave wall halfway around the world. It would seem that everywhere we look, we find traces of these ancient visitors. This jewelry was found in the tomb of a high priest in Mexico. Could this be the design for a modern-day integrated circuit? The patterns are too similar to ignore. And this piece of Mexican ornamentation appears as though it were a modern mechanical claw, such as that used by the astronauts to collect rock samples on the moon. The Museum of Baghdad houses these unusual small clay cups. A small copper tube was placed in the cup with an alloy of different metals inserted into the tube. When the cups were filled with hydrochloric acid, the device produced electricity. This would not be so unusual except for the age of the clay cups, which predate the time of Christ. Who would need electricity thousands of years ago? In the British Museum, we find another technical anachronism. It is a glass lens, polished and cut with astonishing accuracy. Polished lenses weren't produced in Europe until the 16th century. This was found in the Near East and is over 2,000 years old. And finally, we find two examples of flying machines from the past. This was painted on a rock wall in Japan over 7,000 years ago. And this artifact from Colombia is over 2,000 years old. Obviously, the image of a modern-day jet fighter, the tiny gold fuselage was successfully tested in a wind tunnel. In fact, flight seems to be a common denominator in every ancient legend the world over. Each culture, it would seem, contains stories about gods flying in from the heavens. Perhaps that explains the mystery of our last stop in our quest for evidence of these ancient visitors. As we approach the South Peruvian coast, we enter the Bay of Pisco. There, on the side of a mountain, is the drawing of a trident more than 300 meters in height. Over 2,000 years old, it points the way to the interior. By following the sign, we find our way to the mysterious plain of Nazca. At ground level, we see nothing but meaningless lines scraped in the dry, hardened earth. From the air, however, the lines now form complete drawings. We see a spider, an eagle, a peacock, and a hummingbird. Not one of these figures can be recognized at ground level. Stranger still, there are no mountains nearby that would allow a view high enough to appreciate this mysterious artwork. But there's something else odd about the plain of Nazca. Lines, straight as laser beams, approach from the great distance and disappear at the horizon. Some are parallel, others seem to intersect with no apparent purpose. From the air, however, they give the distinct impression of an airport runway. Is it possible that ancient beings came to visit the Earth in the distant past? The archaeological record indicates a common time period, about 3,000 years ago, on every continent for such an event. Evidence of technologies long forgotten and feats of impossible engineering certainly demand deeper consideration. Regardless of the culture, legends persist of gods from the heavens that assisted man and then returned to the stars. Common images are found the world over in stone, and multiple tales of light-haired, bearded men that passed on wisdom to a primitive race of humans seem too coincidental to ignore. Have we been visited? Were the ancient gods really astronauts from another world? We may never know. For now, they remain among the many undiscovered and mysterious secrets of the Millennium.